Good morning, everybody. Welcome to First You Sunday morning, where we are distanced in body but united in spirit. I'm Reverend Liz Lerner-McClay, and I'm the parish minister at First Unitarian in Providence. And I have to say, particularly this week, how grateful I am for our community and for the goodness that moves through it and into each of us, and I pray through us out into the world. May we make the very most of this day we have been given, starting now, as we light our chalices together with the words which remind us that this light burns also in our hearts, and it lights our path towards harmony and justice and hope for all. And I have to say how grateful I am to the folks in our music program who put together two of the songs we are hearing this morning, because these days have been especially tough. And so we need to be reminded by our music that while love is risky, it is also real, and it is here for all of us. And to hear again what we already knew, that in a world holding so much ugliness and betrayal, peace and love and understanding are not hokey or mawkish, they are deadly serious. Our music folks picked these songs many months ago when the spring and the worship we envisioned was looking very different than what has come to pass, but not everything is different. In fact, too much is just the same, especially two stories that have lain heavy on all our souls this week: the threatening of Christian Cooper, a black man, in Central Park by Amy Cooper, a white woman, and the willful police killing of George Floyd, a good man, a black man in Minneapolis. Mostly, I want our church to be a place and a community where we can come for solace and strength. And I want it to be a rallying point for our justice work. And I want it to be a place of joy for us. And I believe so much of the time it is those things, but sometimes our church is a place we have to come to grieve. And sometimes it's where we come to share our rage and our despair, and our church can hold that too. So let me say that when we think about it, there shouldn't be any surprises about what's happening now. COVID has put a lot of us under pressure, and as we know, when pressure is exerted, the places that we are weakest are the most vulnerable. Those are the places where we crack or break or shatter. And racism is one of those weak points for us all. It is in the air we breathe, which means that racism finds its way into us, whether we realize it or not, whether we want it or not, whether we admit it or not. Dr. Cornel West, the great black scholar and theologian, delivered the Ware Lecture at our 2015 General Assembly in Portland, Oregon, and in it he said, "When I look in the depths of my soul, I see white supremacy because I grew up in America. And if there's white supremacy in me, my hunch is you've got some work to do too." Or, as David Aldridge, an African-American broadcast journalist, wrote this week about what happened in Central Park, he said, "Just consider how hardwired something has to be in your consciousness, how deep in the marrow it has to be in a person for them to make an instantaneous decision to say that, to instinctively reach for those words in a second and a half, in less than a minute, into a disagreement with someone they have never met and do not know." I don't want racism to be hardwired in us. I don't want it to be in the marrow, in our marrow, in my marrow, but it is. It has to be. And this is what weakens us in our bones and shows how broken we are as our cities and our towns victimize and kill people of color, especially Black people. Because we are all indicted by what has happened this week and last week and the week before that. We all participate in the society that inclines Amy Cooper to lash out at the man who asks her to leash her dog, to threaten a man who, it turns out, actually shares her last name. And doesn't that bring it all home? They could be distantly related. They could be kin. But she looked at him, and in that instant, she couldn't see any possibility of a connection or even just a person with their own right to exist and speak and live. She othered him. She didn't see one of us. She saw one of you or one of them. She saw an enemy. I don't know Amy Cooper at all, but if all we do is other her, point our righteous finger at her, and see ourselves as divorced from her realities, we are missing an opportunity to understand our own vulnerability and work when it comes to love. Because we all get triggered. We all have moments when we are caught out and defensive and lash out and attack. And maybe it's a stranger, and maybe it's a friend or a family member or our partner, and we are ashamed afterwards. That's happening plenty right now with our own loved ones, people we adore and are shut up with 24/7 until we can't stand it. Can't stand them, can't stand ourselves. We think something ugly or we say something ugly. I have done it. And we feel awful afterwards. And we know we let ourselves down, and more importantly, we let them down. And it was wrong, and it was destructive. And that's all with someone we care about, someone who is not a stranger, someone who is not other to us. So we all have opportunities right now, not despite this virus, but because of it and what it shows us of ourselves, to get more honest with ourselves, to understand our own vulnerability and our own work when it comes to love. I was wrestling with this very point to share with you this morning, and then Reverend Amanda Hambrick Ashcraft, who is a white woman who is pretty darn woke. She is one of the ministers at Middle Collegiate Church in New York City, and she sent out a message on Friday afternoon saying, and I quote her, "We cannot just keep saying their names and using hashtags and weeping heartbroken tears. That does not bring back the dead, nor does it stop the violence. Something drastic has to happen until Black lives actually matter. I'm traumatized, but I'm trying to figure out what to do. And what will we do to disrupt the ugly, death-dealing, life-lynching power of racism in our nation?" And then she listed some of the things she would do, and she included, "I am asking myself when I've been Amy Cooper, so I can do the internal work necessary to combat my own internalized racism, and I am looking around for the Amy Coopers in my network in order to have necessary conversations about the violent nature of white fragility and the deathly use of white power." Unquote. In that fraught, revelatory minute in Central Park, Christian Cooper showed us all there is an element of choice in allowing oneself to be triggered, and I think also an element of privilege in having choices. He shows us that choice and privilege when he is so prepared in advance not to go there. Mr. Cooper's choice and his lack of choice are determined by his life experience and his humanity. He is not a guru or a symbol or a symptom. He is a person. As we almost all know, he's an avid bird watcher. He worked for Marvel Comics. He wears glasses. He shows compassion. He is a regular person who kept his composure and his humanity in a moment when both were under attack and throughout the aftermath. And in simply doing that, living with human decency in a time of stress and suffering, in an epicenter of stress and suffering, he shows us how much of this is in our hands, all our hands. He did an interview a couple of days later with the New York Times out in Central Park. And he said, if this painful process, and then he cut out and said, "Oh, a Baltimore Oriole just flew across," because that's how much he loves birds. He said, if this painful process helps to correct or takes us a step further toward addressing the underlying racial horrible assumptions that we African Americans have to deal with and have dealt with for centuries, then that this woman tapped into, then it's worth it. We have choices, and so much depends on what we choose. Ubuntu. We deplore the society that allowed George Floyd to be slowly suffocated willfully by a policeman. And we participate in that society. We vent our outrage at what happens by day and at night is our society that is rising up in demonstrations across our country. And some are peaceful and some are destructive, and all of them are angry and all of them are desperate because this cannot happen again. But people are raging. Of course, we are raging because what will stop it happening again? And what will stop it happening here in Rhode Island, in our towns, on our streets, because it happens here too? When my good colleague, the Reverend Justin Lester from Congdon Street Baptist Church, recently moved to a new home in a new town in Rhode Island with his family, his first phone calls were to the police chief and to the Senate president who served the area they moved into. And already, someone had alerted the police of suspicious people in the neighborhood. This is our work, right here, right now. The only thing that will stop this begins and ends with us. Clearly, we haven't done enough because it is not stopping. It shouldn't be this hard to make life fair for everyone, to allow all people to live in peace, to show all people respect, to be decent, just decent to each other isn't actually a lot to ask. It's not impressive. But it is this hard to make life fair for everyone, to allow people to live in peace, to show each other some respect, to be decent to each other. It is going to take more, much more, from everyone to make this change, to make sure beyond mere proclamations or signs or bracelets or rallies that alone or with our friends or paying for a purchase or walking with a hoodie or jogging in a pandemic or playing in a park or driving or walking up to their own front door or sitting peacefully minding their own business in their own apartment after a hard day's work, that Black lives actually matter. So this is where the rubber hits the road. How are we going to do better? What does it mean to really practice love beyond belief? It means offering care beyond safety. It means risking awkwardness and embarrassment and rejection. It means trying something we've never done before, maybe never even thought of doing before. It means digging beneath our own tiredness or anxiety or fear to mine ourselves for energy and commitment and courage, and then offering that precious ore to ourselves and to each other. We have got to do this. We have got to do this so that when it matters most, we are able to be the people we believe in being, to rise above the worst that is in us to the best that is in us. I never knew about sistering until I moved here to Providence. Those of you who know about woodworking and construction or joinery already know about sistering. It's when you have a wooden structure with a weakness somewhere, especially when it's a weakness in a foundational part, like a load-bearing beam. It's not the kind of thing you can just remove and replace. One of the best ways to deal with it is sistering. You bring in another board and you fasten it right up close, right up against where the weakness is. You bring them right next to each other like sisters. And together they bear the load and are stronger. So this is what I am doing. I am sistering. The weakness, the damage is in us all, and I trust the strength of our getting close and aligning ourselves with each other to help. My friend, Reverend Howard Jenkins of Bethel AME Church, and I had already planned a meeting next week to talk about rebooting our plan to join folks from our two churches in a journey of learning about race and theology and identity and personhood. And I reached out to him this week and offered support or help in any other form I could, and we are going to talk more about that when we meet. Justin Lester and I are talking Monday about to see what we can do together. I've reached out to other Black colleagues and community leaders that I know with the same offer. Some of them I don't know well. Some of them I felt awkward calling or messaging them. I've met them, but I'd had to remind one of them who I am. What I can tell you is that they didn't feel awkward at all. They let me know that it mattered to them that I reached out, and we started or renewed some conversations about where we might go in building better alliances and better relationships, a net to hold us all, an interdependent web of existence of which we are all part. Reverend Howard and I have spoken before about this belief we share that relationship is essential. If we, a large we, know each other, we will not other each other, or at least we'll do it less. And eventually, one bright day, not at all. We have a lot of work to do. We have a lot of learning to do. We have a lot of awkwardness to risk and mistakes to make. We have a lot of love to give, and we have a lot of love to receive. All that is out there for us, waiting for us, and needs us to go there. We have already begun. We've taken steps on that path. We've joined the movement that declares that Black Lives Matter. We commissioned a historian to look into our own history regarding race and slavery. Remember, one of the last services we had together in our meeting house was the history service, where we learned about our own early links to racism and also to racial justice. These are trailblazing and faithful acts for our congregation. But it's not enough to center our work on larger justice rooted in principles and concepts, because it is always easier to talk about love than to actually love. It's a lot easier to fall in love than it is to stay in love. Love is challenging. It's hard to do. It's hard to live up to. It's hard to live into. But that is what this is about. Ultimately, this is about each of us choosing love, choosing relationship, making sure that Black Lives Matter is really a very personal, even an intimate challenge. And it carries very large implications for us in the moments of our living. We can do this. We can do this partly because we have to, and if we must, we will. And partly because we have each other. When I reached out to the Black clergy and community leaders in the last few days, I did it as your minister. I did it because of this church and what you all deserve from me and what our faith calls us to and what our larger community deserves from all of us. In all we do, we have each other. I have you and you have me, sistering. That's what congregational life is about in the end. Lots and lots of sistering and brothering and siblinging. It is all good. It is all so good. Love beyond belief, my people. The time is now. Amen.